Defending Israel with David Harris on JBS is made possible in part by a generous gift in memory of Eric and Mira J. Spector, the Paul and Lynn Late Family Foundation, To Life, to Love, Barbara and Bob Goodkind, the Patricia Worthen Ullman Foundation,
Hello, JBS viewers. I'm David Harris, and this is Defending Israel. Well, it's that time of year, the end of summer, and among other things, that means millions of students heading for colleges and universities, some for their first year, and others for their second, third, fourth, or graduate school study. And for those among those millions of students heading for the, 4,000 colleges and universities in America, who want to get active politically, I've got a few suggestions. For one, there's an ongoing war begun by Russia that invaded a sovereign country, Ukraine, with the goal of occupying and dominating and controlling Ukraine. In the process, they have violated international humanitarian law. They have committed war crimes repeatedly. Why is Russia invading Ukraine? Why is Russia killing Ukrainians? Innocent civilians, men, women, children, being targeted by missiles and drones across Ukraine. So, you want to get involved in global affairs? Why not speak up? Why not organize activities on campus focusing on Russia, the aggressor, the occupier, and Ukraine, the victim here? Looking for more? Well, how about the Kurds? You're interested in self-determination? You want independence? You want liberation for peoples who've been denied liberation and independence and self-determination? There are literally tens of millions of Kurds spread across 4 countries: Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria. Those Kurds have their own national language. They have a national identity. They have a centuries-long history. And yet, there is no Kurdish state. The best to date is the Kurdish regional government in the northern third of Iraq. And that was an outcome, really, of the American-led invasion of Iraq many years ago. So, want to get focused on people in need, in desperate need of a lifeline in the West, a voice on American campuses, in American politics? Speak up for the Kurds. And while speaking up for the Kurds, focus your energies on the Yazidi population. The Yazidis are not necessarily well known around the world, though one of their leaders received a Nobel Prize just a couple of years ago. But the Yazidis are noble people who've been targeted by jihadists. Thousands of their women have been enslaved by those jihadists. And they need help. They need voices. They need lifelines. You on your campuses can be a lifeline. Looking for more activity? How about focus on women, women's rights, the rights of the gay people? Let's start with Iran, where women have tried to lead a revolution that says we women should be in control of our lives, ourselves, our bodies, and the way we choose to present ourselves to the world. But the Iranian regime is not allowing us to do that. They are imposing on us their theocratic interpretation of our subjugated role as women. And some of us Iranian women have paid the ultimate price: murder, imprisonment, torture, isolation. How about free thinkers in Iran who simply want to challenge the theocratic regime? How about gays, some of whom have been murdered simply for the crime of being gay? They need your voice. They need the voice of America's student activists on campuses across the country to alert the country, to engage with politicians, to mobilize the political parties, to get them active and focused as well, to shine a spotlight on Iran, just as a spotlight on Russia and a spotlight on the denial of Kurdish self-determination. They need American students. How about the women of Afghanistan? Ever since the American withdrawal from Afghanistan, that shameful withdrawal some 3 years ago, the Taliban has returned to power. And just in the last week or so, the Taliban issued new rules and regulations governing what they call vice and virtue. And women are central to those rules and regulations. And you need to read them for yourself. You need to see how women are being told they must be completely and totally covered. Many are denied education. Their voices need to be suppressed because even their voices can be interpreted as seductive. So no singing, no speaking in public, no showing of any parts of the body. No. Unless there is a spotlight shown on the women of Afghanistan, the regime will get away with it. The Taliban will continue to suppress women, half the population, including young children, young girls denied an education. Again, for those in American colleges and universities, men and women who've been blessed with the privilege of higher education, with the privilege of making choices, your voices, again, are desperately needed. Worried about occupation? Well, how about Cyprus? For 50 years, since 1974, this is the 50th anniversary, 37% of the island of Cyprus has been occupied by Turkey, which has sent thousands upon thousands of its soldiers for the last 50 years to establish a military presence and military control of 37% of the island. You're worried about settlers, colonial settlers? Well, how about the thousands upon thousands of Turks from Turkey who've been incentivized, encouraged, or in some cases even manipulated into moving to that northern part of Cyprus under Turkish rule, and therefore destabilizing the long-standing population and population mix? They need a voice. The island of Cyprus needs a voice. It's 50 years of Turkish occupation. We need the voices of American students on colleges and universities. Or how about the people of Venezuela? Wow, could they really benefit from the student voices, the activism, the protests, the demonstrations of you on American campuses? Millions upon millions of Venezuelans have fled their country. Millions upon millions, I repeat, because of the misguided, corrupt, despotic rule, first of Chavez and then now Maduro. And in the meantime, elections have become a sham. The most recent election for president was clearly kidnapped, hijacked by Mr. Maduro and his entourage. They didn't win that election fair and square, but they stuffed the ballot boxes and ensured that there'd only be one winner, the totalitarian rule of Maduro. So again, wow, how powerful it could be if on universities and college campuses across the United States, and by the way, Canada, Europe, and elsewhere, there were those voices saying, no, Mr. Maduro, you cannot steal elections. You cannot force millions of people into exile from their homeland. And we're going to call it out. We're going to blow the whistle. And one can talk about concentration camps in North Korea. And as a child of Holocaust survivors, I don't use the term concentration camps lightly. But in the case of North Korea, the term is apt. It's appropriate. It is the most isolated, totalitarian, ruthless, barbaric nation on earth, perhaps. Who is their voice in the outside world? Who is pointing the finger? Who's calling attention to what's happening in North Korea? Who's calling out these concentration camps? And again, extending a lifeline to the hapless victims who are now the inmates in those camps, targets of re-education or long-term brutal punishment, solitary confinement, or even death. So yes, college students can play a very active role on the geopolitical scene, and their youth, their dynamism, their idealism, their energy can be put to such extraordinary use. Yes, once upon a time, I was a college student. As my children like to chide me, in the last century, Dad. And yes, I was out there on my campus protesting against the war in Vietnam, protesting in favor of civil rights. But I understood something as well. The voices of students was incredibly important, but there also was a line that I, for one, was not prepared to cross. And that line was, I was not going to break any laws. I was not going to intimidate or threaten other people on campus who may not have agreed with me. I was going to respect the codes of conduct. So here we are as colleges and universities reopen. And what's the likelihood that any of the issues that I've just mentioned are going to be front and center on the quad or elsewhere on the campus? Well, judging from early returns, very unlikely. Already we've seen at Cornell University, within days of that great university's reopening, an attempt to take over and do some damage to one of the central buildings on campus. At Columbia University, there have already been articles in the campus newspaper, The Spectator, from organizations mobilizing students, including new students just arriving on campus, excited about their first days in this new chapter of their lives, to join the movement against the power structure, the movement against Israel, the Zionist movement, the Zionist entity. And we've seen it in these universities already, a call to focus on the words that some used were fascist, imperial, and classist. Well, folks, it's striking, isn't it, that the only country that can be named in these early suggestions of what's in store for the fall semester 2024, once again, as in 2023, is Israel. Israel, the one and only liberal democracy in the Middle East. A country that, as we speak, is battling for its very existence against annihilationist forces arrayed in Iran, in its proxies Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, and on it goes. And the words that we're hearing from this anti-Israel movement, and it is an anti-Israel movement, revolve around such charged calls as genocide, occupation, resistance, colonial settlerism. Well, really? Genocide? Genocide? The population of Gaza in 1967, when Israel seized Gaza after a war of survival, thrust upon Israel by Egypt and Syria, the population of Gaza was 350,000. Fast forward from 1967 to 2024, and the population is 2.2 million. Genocide? Well, people say, but Harris, you're diverting attention here, because after all, within the population, isn't there an Israeli genocide? Well, there isn't an Israeli genocide, because genocide is an intentional effort to destroy a people based on their collective identity. If that's what Israel had sought to do in Gaza, number one, the population would not have expanded by whatever, 600-700%. And number two, Israel would be carpet bombing Gaza from north to south, from east to west. Very much, by the way, as the Allies did in the Second World War when they began to strike Germany and Japan in particular. Carpet bombing, incendiary bombing, and ultimately, of course, in the case of Japan, 2 atomic bombs. Instead, Israel has chosen to send its own soldiers into Gaza to fight on the streets and in the tunnels in an effort as much as possible to limit civilian casualties, even as the goal of Hamas, it must be said, is to maximize Gazan civilian casualties in an effort to instrumentalize and weaponize Gaza's civilians, draw the media's attention, and stir the anger of so-called human rights activists around the world. So no, there is no genocide nor anything close to a genocide, no matter how many times these agitators and protesters repeat the word. Repeating it alone does not make it a reality, nor does repeating the word occupation make it a reality. Gaza has been on its own since 2005. That is now 19 years. Hamas has been in control since 2007. That's 17 years. Israel left. I repeat, Israel left. It left unilaterally because there was no partner for a signed peace agreement. It left. And it left Gaza to fend for itself and to create whatever it chose to create for the first time in Gaza's long history. So no, it's not occupied. And no, Israel does not control all the borders either, because they, the agitators and protesters, don't want you to know or remember that Gaza has 2 borders, not one, and the other is Egypt, a fellow Arab and Muslim majority country that has also decided for its own reasons that it doesn't want Hamas to succeed because it doesn't want its ideological mother, the Muslim Brotherhood, to succeed. After all, the Muslim Brotherhood threatens the region, including centrally, it threatens Egypt. A settler colonial state? Well, it's been said before, I hope it gets through, but Jews are not colonial settlers in the land of Israel. Jews are indigenous, I repeat, indigenous to the land of Israel. The link goes back some 4,000 years. It's documented repeatedly. You don't have to be a practicing Jew, or for that matter, Christian or Muslim, to see that in the Hebrew Bible, Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, is mentioned well over 600 times. That Zion is mentioned over 140 times. You don't have to be a practicing Christian to know that Zion and Jerusalem are also mentioned in the Christian Bible. And yes, by the way, in the Quran, the people of Israel are mentioned some 40 times in the Quran and additional times in the other sacred texts of Islam. So no, these are not settlers who embarked on ships from Europe in order to grab land and exploit land. This is something totally different. This is an indigenous people that has never lost its link, its tie, its connection. Even though over the centuries they were expelled, they were murdered, but nonetheless they never lost their link. As Psalm 137, one of the favorite psalms, by the way, of the late President Harry Truman, said, "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat, yea, we wept, when we remembered Zion." So yes, Zionists are people who draw from that word Zion, from the Bible, from the Psalms, and who simply believe that Jews are indigenous, have a connection to the land, and have the right to self-determination. And what about that other charged, titillating word, resistance? That's part of these encampments. That's part of these stormy protests that seize buildings and even hold janitorial staff, a kind of prisoner for hours, and threaten other students on campus. Resistance? Again, Israel left Gaza in 2005. So resistance to what? Aha! Now we know the real answer since October the 7th. It's not resistance to Israel in Gaza. It's resistance to Israel. The very notion of the state of Israel, the reborn state of a nation that has existed, as I said, for millennia, and that for periods of time also had its own sovereignty until it was taken away by invaders. So yes, it's all about removing Israel from the map. That's what they mean by occupation. That's what they mean by resistance. That's what they mean by settler colonialism. It's about removing Israel from the map. The one and only Jewish majority nation on earth, tied to its ancestral homeland, and the building blocks of its population being Jews who have fervently believed in the land for centuries and lived there whenever they could with their prayers and their traditions and their beliefs. Jews who fled pogroms in Tsarist Russia, who fled modern-day communism, Jews who survived the Holocaust and had nowhere else to go because so many of the world's doors were slammed shut to Jews before the Second World War, during the Second World War, and even after the Second World War. And oh yes, that other group that they want you to forget as well. The hundreds of thousands of Jews, forgotten refugees from Arab and Muslim majority countries who were forced to leave, who fled because they had no protection in those countries, because they were second or third class citizens, because there was no rule of law and they had no recourse to legal protection. Those Jews who have now emptied out and left countries like Afghanistan and Libya and Algeria and Sudan and Yemen and Syria and so many others without a Jewish community. Those are the Jews who found a home, safety, a refuge in Israel. And now these protesters and instigators back on college campuses want those 9.5 million citizens of Israel, including some 7 million Jews, and by the way, more than 2 million Arab citizens of Israel, a far cry from the 150,000 or so Arab citizens who were there at the founding of the state in 1948. So again, apartheid, genocide, all of these charged words which are meant to mobilize and energize people, but that ultimately, when examined, have no meaning. No meaning. They want that state to simply disappear. The only liberal democracy in the region, the only Jewish majority nation in the region, a nation fighting for its existence. So my plea At this time of year, as students go back and as parents watch their students on campuses and donors consider what they're going to do in the year ahead, and administrations think about how they're going to handle potentially difficult situations, and Cornell and Columbia are among the universities that have already signaled that some of their students are ready for more confrontation this year. My plea is that we get real, that most students in this country, and a recent Brandeis University study has shown this quantitatively and qualitatively as well, that most students on American campuses are there not to try and dismantle the state of Israel, are not there to try and paralyze the campus community, are not there to intimidate or threaten Jewish students. They're there to study, they're there to learn, they're there to meet other students, they're there to be guided by faculty as they take this huge step into the world. They're there for a whole host of reasons. And it's time for those constituents and communities to take back their universities, to say, look, this is not about freedom of speech. Let's be absolutely clear, and let's not create that as some straw man argument. This is not about freedom of speech. I may disagree with those who say they don't like Israel, they criticize Israel, they accuse Israel. I may not like it, I may fiercely disagree with them, but I will never question their right to say what they wish to say and to assemble. That's not the issue. The issue is when they cross the line on hate crimes, on intimidation and threats, and on property desecration and violence. That's the line. Will universities defend that line? Will trustees make sure that universities are fulfilling their mission and mandate? And will the vast majority of students who don't believe that they should be about dismantling an existing sovereign state called Israel, and don't believe that they should deny the vast majority of Jews the right to self-determination, like so many other people on the planet, who are not prepared to engage in these outrageous charges of genocide and resistance and occupation and settler colonialism against fascism and imperialism and classism, who don't want to get drawn into this swamp of jihadist agitators and neo-Marxists and anarchists, the do-gooders, the naive, the well-intentioned. Open your eyes, understand that those other hardcore groups are trying to draw you in, and they're trying to co-opt you. They're trying to make you believe that all the world's ills are heaped on one tiny little sliver of land, which is the size of New Jersey, Israel. They want you to believe that if we talk about Ukraine, if we talk about the Kurds, if we talk about women and gays and free thinkers in Iran, if we talk about the women suppressed in Afghanistan, if we talk about occupation in Cyprus, if we talk about stolen elections in Venezuela and millions of people exiled, if we talk about concentration camps in North Korea, all we're doing is diverting attention, distracting you from the only issue that counts in their minds, in the minds of those student agitators and outside agitators and leaders who want you to believe that Israel and Israel alone is the source of all the evil and wickedness on the earth. While they're drawing on ancient anti-Semitic blood libels and tropes and saying it. But please, open your eyes and understand that there's much more going on in the world, and there should be much more going on in your campus. And that small group, however noisy, however active, however intimidating, should not be allowed to control the conversation, much less to dominate the campus environment. That's my hope, as the fall begins on American colleges and universities in the United States and elsewhere. Let's see. Let's hope. Let's be vigilant. This is David Harris, defending Israel. See you next week.